For today's video, we're going to look at Saggers and Saggar pins and Sagger pin marks on vintage dinnerware. And even though I'm focusing on Homer Laughlin pieces, this actually applies to just about every other pottery where you find these pin marks. So we'll start with this rose deep plate from Fiesta. This is from the 1950s. We turn it over. There's your Fiesta marking. But we also see these pin marks. There's 1, 2, and 3. And sometimes people will see these and they'll think that it's damage. But actually that's a result of the manufacturing process. And it's from little Sagger pins. And this is a Sagger pin. So we'll get to those in a moment. A Hudson plate. This is from around 1910 or so. It doesn't have a date code. But again, we see 1, 2, where's the third one? Right there, there's the third one. 3 pin marks. About 1900, we have American Beauty. And again, there's 3 pin marks. And finally, a piece of Riviera. So this is a platter, so it wasn't just round pieces, it could be oval pieces as well. And there are your 3 pin marks. So after a piece was glazed and it had to be fired, it would go into a piece like this, a Sagger. Now these pins were arranged in columns, 3 columns. You see these little triangle holes. And they're made that way so that when you put the pin in, you've got a point on the top part. The Sagger is made of fire clay. It can withstand the temperatures of a kiln. And here's a couple pieces of Harlequin. These are Harlequin deep plates, roughly 8 inches in diameter. And you can see how they were stacked in there. So this would have been filled with either 8-inch plates or deep plates or rim soups or coupe soups. And then once it was fired, they could take everything out. So it was somebody's job to actually fill these things up and then unload them and then reuse them as long as they could be reused. Usually the pins broke and sometimes they were still stuck to the pieces of ware. Usually it's just a remnant of the pin. And it was the job of the ware dresser to come back with a tool and go around these pin marks and smooth them out so that they're not jagged. So if you see these pin marks, that's where they come from, usually a Sagger. And they come in different shapes and different forms. This is a picture taken at Homer Laughlin in 1981, and they're not using these Sagger containers, but they're using these towers. But they're still using Sagger pins, so you still have the Sagger pin marks, and then they're loading it on the kiln shelf in the background. And here's another one, again from 1981. This is taken at Homer Laughlin, and he's using these little towers to create these columns of pieces using these Sagger pins. And again, these pieces would have the Sagger pin marks on the bottom. And you see that all the way up to about 1986. So a lot of your vintage pieces are going to have them. If we look at Fiesta, you're talking about the plates, the chop plate, the compartment plate, the platter, the figure-8 tray, the ashtray, the deep plate, both of the saucers. They're going to have the pin marks plus a wet foot. We call this a wet foot. Now the other way to fire a piece is to actually wipe the foot and put it directly on the kiln shelf. And contemporary Fiesta has that. So this is tangerine. There's a newer Fiesta marking. And we see it has a dry foot or a wiped foot. That's one way to tell the difference between something that's old or new when it comes to the flat pieces. Again, that's going to be plates like the dinner plate and the 6-inch plate, 7-inch plate, 8-inch plate, 9-inch plate, the chop plate, the compartment plate, the platter, the figure-8 tray, the ashtray. I said 8-inch plate, I mean the deep plate, and then the 2 saucers. There are other pieces that are going to have both wet and dry feet that are vintage, however. So if you look at the bowls, and it's usually the bowls that cause the problem. So these are both dessert bowls from Fiesta. They're both vintage. This is turquoise, this is rose. If we look at the turquoise one, it has a wet foot with these pin marks. This was probably fired on a tripod, though, not a Sagger. We look at this one, which is rose, we turn it over, and it has a dry foot. So this is a wiped foot. So both vintage, but we have pin marks with a wet foot and a dry foot here where it sat directly on the kiln shelf. Again, with these 5.5-inch fruit bowls. This is blue, this is turquoise. We flip them over. This has a dry foot, sat directly on the kiln shelf. This one has a wet foot, but we see the little pin marks underneath the lip. This sat in a Sagger, the whole column of them. So unless you're talking about the really flat pieces, it does not apply telling the difference between old and new, because you can have these pieces where there's both. This is also true of pieces like the footed salad bowl, the tripod candle holders, and several others. Your utility tray, you're going to have both depending on how it was made. The cast pieces generally have a dry foot. The pressed pieces generally have Sagger pin marks. So this Sagger came from Taylor Smith and Taylor. And a group of us took a little tour in 1999, and the owner said at the end of the tour, if you can carry it, you can take it. So I took this Sagger. I was very happy to get it because it does show how these pieces were fired and how we get these pin marks. Some other pieces I took that day, I took several pieces of these, a kiln shelf. This is one of them where you have these, where you stack them and you can put things on kiln shelves. So you can put like a whole bunch of these down, and then you can put like a slab on it, and then you can put more pieces of pottery on top of it. And then some temperature logs. These were just laying on the ground, anchor hawking. That's what TS&T became in the last 10 years or so of its life. Ceramic Products Division, Chester, West Virginia. And these are dated March 19th, 1981. Again, March 19th, 1981. So I thought that was fun because that was the last year that TS&T was in operation. So I think that's going to do it for Saggers and Saggar pins and Sagger pin marks. Again, when you're talking about Fiesta, you will see these pin marks on all the sizes of plates: the chop plate, the compartment plate, the platter, the figure 8 tray, the ashtray, the deep plate, and both saucers.